Yo, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We react to Jordan Peterson's famous or infamous conversation with Sam Harris. Let me just make sure that my audio is properly configured. I forgot to do this before starting the stream. Okay, everything is good. So, yesterday I started reacting to a video called What is True? And this was early on, many years ago in 2017. Sam Harris had a podcast called Waking Up. And Jordan Peterson, who at the time was a recently attained celebrity status, he came on this podcast and they had a debate. The debate was around what is true and what is the meaning of something being true. And this originally stems from although Jordan and Sam were running in the same circles, Jordan was advocating for reasons to believe in Christianity, and he is a big fan of religion, and he has comes to this question about what is true. And there's a lot of people make fun of Jordan Peterson because sometimes he really doesn't. Sometimes he really doesn't. Sometimes he has great explanations that are intuitive, interesting, and very compelling. And then sometimes he kind of fails to articulate his perspective in a way that resonates with a lot of people. Like, for example, there's been lots of clips that have gone around where people say, "Do you believe in God?" And then he says, "Well, what do you mean by believe?" And then he says, "What do you mean by you?" And he goes in and asks all these rhetorical questions that are hard to answer. And people don't typically get convinced by that, although he does have a point. When you dive deep and into very foundational questions, a lot of the heuristics and rules of thumb that we use to assess the meaning of statements falls apart. There's a lot of self-referential concepts embedded in our language, and it's meant to be used in the context of everyday problems. Like, let's go over here and catch this buffalo, or go hunting, or coordinate something across a social group. Like, that's what language is usually meant to be used for. And when you start really asking questions and go down layers and layers of asking questions, at some point things will start to become relatively incoherent. And so we just have to kind of watch out for that. It doesn't mean that you can't have a discussion about things that are very deep, like what does the word truth mean? But it means that you need to be very careful when you are wading into that territory. And I think it's both wrong to just dismiss this entirely and say, well, Jordan Peterson is giving kind of a weird philosophical answer that's not convincing, therefore he's wrong. And also don't get confused by just the fact that he has an answer. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. So what I want to try to do is I want to listen to this with an open mind and see if we can get to the truth of what Jordan is trying to say. So in the last episode, we first heard a bit about his political backstory, which is, everyone knows that probably by now, so it's not really worth even mentioning the history of Jordan Peterson's career. But then he started to talk about his worldview, and one of the things that he pressed Sam on is, he said to Sam that he doesn't believe that he is enough of a Darwinian. And so what did he mean by that? Well, basically, he was kind of putting forth this idea that information and survival are deeply linked concepts, and that information that essentially helps an organism survive is, in a sense, true, and information that doesn't help an organism survive is, in a sense, false. And there's a Darwinian way of actually assessing truth. And this wasn't very well substantiated. He just kind of started going off the cuff and talking about this idea. So Sam is going to put some pushback. And I gave my analysis for why I thought Jordan was on the right track last time. I'm going to give you that analysis again, and this will be a standalone video. You don't have to go back and watch the last video, although feel free to. There was some interesting discussions that we had in that video. But I'm going to recap my assessment, but I want to let them start their conversation. We'll react to their conversation. This is an audio only podcast, so I won't be showing a video feed. I'm just going to just play the audio. And then I will interject with my perspective as we go on further in the video. All right. And if you like this kind of thing, you like discussing and debating intellectually stimulating topics, I personally focus on technology and the effect that technology has in society. And if you like this type of stuff, please consider liking this video and subscribing. All right. Let's start listening to where we left off last time.
There are a few issues here that I think we need to pull apart. I think that the basic issue here, and where I disagree with you, is you seem to be equivocating on the nature of truth here. You're using truth in two different senses and finding a contradiction that I don't, in fact, think exists. So,
you know what? I think we should back up a little bit just so we can hear Jordan's initial explanation, and as we see Sam is pushing back, so just so that we have that full context as we go into this conversation. I'm just going to back us up a little bit.
Outcome, which we were also terrified about during.
1 second. Let me just go to the transcript here, if there is one. Transcript. And I'm just going to search Darwinian. Okay. I'm going to go back. Yeah, let's go back here. Around here. That's where we should start listening.
Fish to fry. I think we need to talk about religion and science and atheism and the foundations of morality, things like meaning, your interest in mythology, your fear of nihilism. Let's get into all of that. I think you and I share some fundamental concerns, and we feel a similar kind of urgency. I think it expresses itself in slightly different ways and different ways of talking, but we feel an urgency that our fellow human beings get certain questions right. But I think we probably disagree about some fundamental matters, and whether those will be, in the end, a matter of semantic difference and can be pushed to the periphery or not, I think that remains to be seen. But I think it will be interesting to talk about these things.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I thought I might do is pursue the tack that you're not enough of a Darwinian, which I thought would be quite comical, because I've often thought the same about Richard Dawkins. But I would like to point out some of the things, because I read a fair bit of what you've written now. It's not by no means comprehensively, but I think I've come to understand your central claims. And of course, they're very powerful, because you're an advocate for materialist rationalism, essentially, I would say, with a bit of spirituality on the side. And, materialist rationalism is an unbelievably powerful tool, and it's very coherent. And so, I address the topic with trepidation, because, it was certainly the case that the philosophical doctrine to which you adhere has transformed the world and has posed an unbelievably potent threat, let's say. That's one way of challenge, that's better, to traditional views of the world. So, but there are some things that we share in common that maybe we could start with. So, and you tell me if I've got any of this wrong.
I think a good starting point is this. It actually leads directly into this claim about not being Darwinian enough, but it's the concept of truth. I've heard you say in a variety of ways that religious truth isn't scientific truth, and that the difference here is that science tells you what things are, and that religion tells you how you should act. So let's talk about that, and I think that does connect to this Darwinian concern of yours.
Yeah, that's a good, I'm going to approach that obliquely to begin with. So let me throw a couple of propositions at you, and I know that you don't accept Hume's distinction between an is and an ought, that you're willing to challenge that, and fair enough, it's a reasonable thing to try to challenge, although it's quite difficult. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. But I've been thinking a lot about the essential philosophical contradiction between a Newtonian worldview, which I would say your view is nested inside, and a Darwinian worldview, because those views are not the same. They're seriously not the same. I mean, the Darwinian view, as the American pragmatists recognized, so that was William James and his crowd, recognized almost immediately, was a form of pragmatism. And the pragmatists claim that the true ethic embedded in it, and the ethic is the claim that if what you do works, then it's true enough. And that's all you can ever do. And what Darwin did, as far as the pragmatists were concerned, was to put forth the following proposition, which was that it was impossible for a finite organism to keep up with a multi-dimensionally transforming landscape, environmental landscape, let's say. And so the best that could be done was to generate random variants, kill most of them because they were wrong, and let the others that were correct enough live long enough to propagate, whereby the same process occurs again. So it's not like the organism is a solution to the problem of the environment. The organism is a very bad partial solution to an impossible problem.
So I just want to summarize a little bit about what Jordan is saying here. And I just want to focus specifically on this tail end of that, where he's saying, so essentially what he's saying is that there is so understanding the environment in which an organism lives is an impossible task. And there's a lot of reasons why. One thing I like to say is I like to talk about complex systems. And complex systems are things where you're not able to predict the macro level behavior of the system based on micro states and inputs. So for example, if you are in the environment, in an environment, you are in the world. Since the world is a complex system, you're not necessarily going to be able to predict what will happen in the future just by observing the things around you. Now, there are some caveats and there are things that are predictable within the system, but as a general principle, that is how you kind of can apply complexity theory to predicting the future. Predicting the future is impossible fundamentally because of entropy. And one other way of looking at this, which might make a little bit more sense, is this idea of computational irreducibility. And this is something that Stephen Wolfram talks about. And he has this novel take on basically reformulating physics in computational terms. It's interesting because basically, and I'm not a physicist, but a lot of the math that we have used historically to describe the universe in physics has been I'm not even sure like how you would characterize this, but they would use things like partial differential equations, which have assumptions about kind of like that things are not discrete, they're continuous. There's infinitesimally small values, and these are smooth curves, and there's it's almost like a branch of calculus. And that has been the language that we've used to describe the physical world. And it's gotten super complex, and it's only gotten us so far. We've kind of hit a wall. There's other ways of formulating the mathematics behind physics. And so one way is to use the toolkit that we have that's called discrete mathematics, where things are broken into pieces, so to speak. It's discrete, it's not continuous. So like imagine like a string, right? That's like a continuous line from one point to another. Not really, but you can think of it that way, versus a chain. A chain would be like all these links. Each piece is like a link that would be like something that's more discrete, whereas something like a string could be thought of as continuous. And so anyway, what I'm saying here is that he has essentially reformulated a lot of physical laws in terms of basically using computer science to model the universe. And this is a completely valid way of doing things. And he talks about, anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but the point is he talks about this idea of computational irreducibility. And basically the point is that sometimes you can you can reduce computation, like there's some sort of computation that you need to do, and you are able to find a more efficient and faster, easier way of doing it. But sometimes it is possible for something to be reduced as much as possible. And there's just certain tasks take certain amounts of computational power. And there's nothing that you can do physically to reduce the amount of computational power past a certain point that is needed for any given task. And so if you're in the environment and in a world, it's a complex system, it's computationally irreducible, and you're sitting in this world and you don't have an infinite amount of computational power. You have a finite amount of computational power that you can use to analyze the world, be that a finite amount of brain power or a finite amount of power in your phone. You only have a finite capacity to calculate what is going to happen in the world around you. Now, given this fundamental constraint imposed by physics, you are just simply not going to be able to predict all of the challenges that you will face in your environment. And you are not going to be able to perfectly, therefore, simulate the future and the future environment. And you don't know if your goal is to survive and you want to be fit in a Darwinian sense, then you won't know what actions to take. You won't be able to figure this out yourself. So what is needed is there needs to be some sort of process that searches for a solution to this problem that will estimate a heuristic for figuring out how to act in the world. And that's what the process of evolution does. It tries many different things. It takes many different shots on goal across time. And some of these perish and some of these go on and self-perpetuate. And in this process, it's actually a search process, and it's searching with not random variation. I think that's a slight error on Jordan's part, saying it was truly random. It's not truly random, but there is variation across organisms, and that variation is like different hypotheses. Like imagine that you had a bunch of scientists come and try to solve a problem. How would they do it? They would all look at the evidence, look at everything that they can, and they would come up with all these hypotheses. I think it's for this reason. I think this is happening because of that reason. And then you would do a series of experiments. And some people would be proven true, and some people would be proven false. And then those that were proven true, you would then want to retest that to make sure it holds up. And you'd want to look and see, does it fail? Does this hypothesis fail under any other scenarios? Was there anything missing? Let's do more experiments. And at the end of the day, there's going to be one scientist standing who came up with the right theory, or multiple ones that came up with the same theory that agree. And perhaps that initial version was just an original hypothesis that somebody came up with, or perhaps it was an iterative process where the hypothesis was built off of data that came from the first round of experiments and so on. So that's the similar process that evolution is running. And so it's the reason why this is an important thing is because there's no way that you can absolutely know objectively how to survive in the world, how to have Darwinian fitness. This is not something that you can know. It's too computationally complex or irreducible. It's too difficult of a task. Nobody is able to simulate the future materialistically. And if you know, basically kind of, you can say, well, if you know where all the placement of all the atoms are, you could simulate what's going to happen and decide what to do. True, maybe you could do that, but you can't actually do that. So what is your next best thing? The next best thing is to come up with a process that is going to select a heuristically correct model that will work across time to survive in your environment. And furthermore, we have to acknowledge that there is a changing environment. So let's say that the climate is between this degrees and this degrees temperature. Well, maybe that goes up by a lot or down by a lot, right? So it's not always going to be the same circumstances. So not only are you not able to know, just if you take the environment as a constant, you are not sure just a priori as an organism how you should act to maintain your fitness indefinitely. You need a heuristic to even just figure that out in the case where the environment is not changing. If the environment is changing, then this is also a moving target, and it's just literally an impossible, never unsolvable problem. I mean, even if you could simulate everything, right, then you'd also have to simulate the changes in the environment, and that's not possible, and that's why evolution is necessary. Evolution is a search process. It's an optimization process. It optimizes for fitness, and it searches for the models of the world that, in the configuration of genes, in the case of biological life, but it searches for the models of the world that are predictive in terms of generating the actions that perpetuate being alive, perpetuate the species. Okay, let's keep listening now that I've kind of added this context.
Okay, and the thing that about that is that you can't get outside that claim. I can't see how you can get outside that claim if you're a Darwinian, because the Darwinian claim is that the only way to ensure adaptation to the unpredictably. So I was thinking of two things that I read. One was the attempt by the KGB back in the late part of how much it can be divorced, and from what. And then the second example is, a scientist with any sense would say, well, our